Okay, so welcome to everybody who's joined us for this webinar. It's the second webinar by Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts in our series of the future of teaching and learn. My name's Robert Wells and I'm hosting this webinar with my colleague Louise Lee. Today we're going to be exploring the barriers that can prevent teaching and learning being effective when we move online.
And in terms of the structure of the webinar, today we have three speakers. We have Brian Watkins, lecturer from the School of Theatre and Entertainment Arts in the Academy of Performing Arts. And Stella Lau, senior lecturer from the School of Dance in the Academy as well. And we also have an external speaker, Logan Balavijendran, customer success manager from Canvas Instructure. And they will be speaking on the questions of how we can overcome barriers to online education. And during the discussions, if you have any questions, you can post them on the Q&A box. So you will see there's a Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. So you can click that and type your questions in. We will also be monitoring the chat. So if you would like to enter your questions there, that's fine as well. So without further delay, I think I'm going to pass the mic to our first speaker, Brian Watkins.
Okay, hello everybody. Firstly, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Brian Watkins. I'm a lecturer here at the Academy of Performing Arts in Hong Kong. I'm a lecturer of Scenic Art, which is part of the design department in the School of Theatre and Entertainment Arts. My history in teaching is a short one. In fact, the last year was my very first year in education and my first year of teaching. This, in some ways, gave me a little bit of an advantage because I had no preconceived ideas of how the subject should or could be taught. So when circumstances arose where we had to adapt some of the coursework online, I just rolled with it, you know. It was a new time. Everything I did this year was for the first time. So it was my first time, like everyone, it was their first time dealing with a pandemic and having to work with the problems around that. But I think having a lack of experience in teaching was beneficial in that sense. For those of you that might be unfamiliar with the subject that I'm teaching, Scenic Art is the task of replicating and enlarging a design for the stage. So this could entail a 12-meter by 10-meter cloth, for example. As I'm sure you're aware, this isn't really a task that you can do at home in your bedroom online. So this is one of the problems that we might be talking about today, the need for space and machinery. So, you know, let's not kid ourselves. Not everything can be done online, but what can we do online to facilitate those tasks? You know, how can we run online teaching alongside physical face-to-face teaching, and what benefits does that have? You know, I come across some benefits that I was unaware of going into, but came out of that kind of period of online teaching with a new insight. I'm probably not going to talk too much about that at this stage, because I'm sure as the questions come in, these answers will come out. So, I mean, one of the things that we can do online, as I said, we can't really paint a large cloth or make a large piece of physical scenery online, but we can do smaller tasks. We can do exercises. We can talk about subject theory. And these don't need the same large space or the same machinery or the same large team, because often in the subject that I teach, you're working within a team of up to 12 people to make one object sometimes. So this is very difficult to do remotely, but there are exercises that can be done online and theory that can be talked about online. And this is not a direct replacement for the experience of working in that large space on that large item, but it can certainly, all practice and study is beneficial in terms of building the foundations to then go on and do this practical work. So I think I'm just going to leave it there for an introduction, because I have lots of things that I want to say, but I don't feel that it's necessary at this time until the questions start rolling in. So on to Stella, I presume.
Right. Yeah, we can pass over to Stella. So Stella's the second presenter. She's senior lecturer in ballet and leader of Gifted Young Dancer program, which involves outreach for the school.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Logan. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our webinar. I think it's a very important time to connect to people, under the COVID-19. Unlike Logan, he's a freshman of the academy. I have been teaching in the academy for 20 years. But for me, as dance educator, we're facing a lot of new challenges when it comes to teaching under this pandemic. So we learn new things every day, like myself. So I think before we want to tackle, how we're going to transfer our learning, our virtual, our physical learning to virtual online, because in dance, it requires the kinesthetic experience and also the human connection, for the development of a dance artist. And this is a very crucial element in our dance teaching and learning. And before we come up with how we're going to deal with it, I think the first thing as dance educators, and we're looking in our curriculum, what is appropriate and also safe to teach online. And also we look at different ways to deal with it. For example, we have 4 modes of delivery, in the past year. So we make use of the Canvas, either is it pre-recorded video or just some live stream teaching or Zoom. So I think these enable us to continue to engage our students in learning in that virtual space. So for the past few months, in summary, my experience of how to deal with online is a different pedagogy. So we are constantly in the cycle of planning, delivering, reflecting, and also adapting to this kind of new approach under this new normal. So going into examples, we need to modification of the content, because all we deal with is a practice-based or performance-based courses, which normally we develop students' movement vocabulary, technical skills. And at this point, with the online learning, we are refocusing on the body, the physical principles, develop our inner awareness and also coordination of body by using therabands, contact conditioning exercise, because due to the restrictions and space and floor issues, in dance it's very important to keep up the principle of safe dance practice whenever you're practicing in the studio or at home, especially because of the space issue. Another example, with the change of framework in class structure. So as teachers, we are really aware of the students. They are not as alert as normal school days. They wake up and then they immediately attend Zoom classes. So we include warm-up session or some floor work prior to our technique class. So this is to accommodate students' needs, and during class time, we need to, and we learn to, for the past months, to give time, and also for us to have a brief break, because Zoom classes can be really tiring at times. So we are aware of that for the wellness of students and the teachers. We remind to give appropriate break in between classes, and also during the class time, we allow them to have time to move their furniture or adjust the base while moving from one side to another. And also we have some difficulty like sound delay. So we need to have time and to have patience to ensure all students in the class are working on the same page. Other than that, moving designs are adjusted to simpler forms or less moving around, not jumping or leaping across the living room because of the space restriction. So this is to ensure the safe dance practice principle while keeping them up the fitness level. And what I said, communication is the key. So as a team, with the School of Dance, we collect feedbacks from students from time to time, and also to make appropriate changes for the next class. So this is why we are constantly engaging in this reflecting, redesigning, planning cycle. So next, I want to share with you, because I think the time is very, we need to have a very concise sharing this morning. So I just want to share with you what works and doesn't work and how we're going to plan for the better, in the next new semester. There's something we can't change. We can't change the physical, we can't change the space, we can't change the weak Wi-Fi at home, floor issues, and also we can't change sometimes because of the competition of space, everyone's working from home, the intensified relationship that we can't change. But then I noticed some change from being doubtful, skeptical, towards the new approach of teaching and learning, our team, our staff and students, frustration, complaining, hurting during class because bashing into the furniture or floor. But yet, in the past half a year, I think we learned how to articulate ourselves or concern an issue in a very respectful way. I can see the students, they build up the skills of more self-discipline, more self-organization. And at the end of this academic year, they share with me, they're starting to enjoy because they can use their time in their own, they can plan their learning, in their own way. So they start to enjoy it. And also as educators, we look at the development of these young artists in a holistic way. And anticipating of the new semester, because we don't know when it's going to get over this COVID-19. We prepare to have design a new timetable, whether it is face-to-face or online, workable for both staff and students. And also, we mentioned the floor issue because for dancers, it's very important that we are very particular with that kind of like a floor that's suitable for dance and also safe. So the School of Dance has purchased enough practice mattress for staff and students to start a new semester. And also we looking at how to modularize our content. So we further modify our teaching content to adapt to the new change under this situation. And also in the performance and production, that kind of courses, we're looking at a new way to deliver, to break down into smaller modules that will be more possible to deliver while online. I think I need to stop from here and let our guest speaker to continue sharing with you. Thank you, Robert.
Okay, thank you, Stella. And so now we're going to move on to our third speaker, Logan, from Canvas Instructure. I should mention that Canvas is the learning management system that we use in the academy to support online learning. So Logan.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, everyone. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here and speak with you all, and most importantly, learn from all of you and from the conversations that we're going to have. Yeah, I've been with Instructure for about 6 months, actually. It's not for that long. And previously I was, I've been always in education for about 20 plus years. I started as a tutor in the Faculty of Engineering in a little school in Malaysia, which I'm sure many of you have not heard of. And then from there, taught engineering and then taught public speaking and persuasive speaking in Korea, where I lived for another 5 years. And then finally ended up in Australia. And along the way, transitioned from a teaching student-facing role into a learning design and working with academics to improve their digital capabilities and designing content on Canvas. And it was fun listening to both Brian and Stella, because these are the conversations I really enjoy having with academics. I come in from a kind of neutral perspective, focused on the pedagogy or sometimes the technology, but mostly the pedagogy, and increasingly the student, and trying to really understand what the student is going through and partner with the student in developing and designing new teaching methods and methodologies. And listening to both of you, it's a wonderful opportunity, I think, to collaborate with technologists and with students and think about how we can thrive in this phrase that I don't like, which is the new normal. Find ways where we can figure out how to help students leap across the room in our learning, which is something I wish I did more when I was learning. I'm going to jump in and share some slides. And this is my being the curse of being in the classroom too much, I think. But I've been having these conversations quite a lot with friends and with colleagues, and thinking about how to shift what we do into a different environment. And this is something that people have been doing for a very long time, obviously. It's just having to do it really, really quickly in a really condensed period. You know, and everyone struggles in different ways because you're doing something that's completely new and different. And it's much harder when you need to deal with, you know, painting large pieces of cloth, or if you're working in a lab dissecting little creatures, or if you're working with dangerous chemicals, or, you know, everyone struggles in different ways. The place I like to start is by encouraging instructors to transform for a different mode. And I found this little framework really, really helpful. And it is trying to position the teaching into these two spectrums of bandwidth and immediacy, right? So in the live teaching in classroom tends to be high bandwidth, high immediate, and our immediate move is to do substitution, to do like for like, right? We're doing all of these things in the classroom. Let's all do all of these things in the virtual classroom. But often it doesn't really translate. And I think the great beauty about doing things online in the digital world is that low bandwidth, low immediacy, because it gives students the freedom and flexibility to learn when it best suits them, to learn when the environment best permits them to learn. And this doesn't always work out, but if we can think about ways to shift it there, and it will give that student more freedom and give them more opportunity to really take ownership over their learning, right? So there are different ways, and I'm not going to go into all of that, but I think if you think about all the different tools and opportunities you have and just kind of spread it out, you'll discover that you don't really have to learn new things. You know, you can leverage email more, you can leverage audio recordings more, you can leverage the things that you already have to create a sense of immediacy, but not high bandwidth, or create a sense of connection without necessarily having everyone online at the same time. When we start that learning development process, I like to, I say I have an 80-20 rule. It's not really a rule, it's just I came up with, but often if you say you have a rule, it becomes something that's easy to understand. So there's an 80-20 rule where 80% of what you do is asynchronous, or should be able, the student should be able to engage with it in an asynchronous manner, right? So the content, assessment, and even some feedback can be asynchronous. And instead you save the synchronous bit for the thing which you think is really, really valuable, right? So the points in which you are inspiring the student, or motivating them, or ensuring that you're trying to create a sense of belonging or ownership, you save the asynchronous bits for that, not for things which you can deliver one-to-many. And then what I tried to do and encourage the academics to do is to map the learning out into a rhythm or a schedule from the student's perspective, right? So the student can see when their learning activities will need to happen, and what type of learning activities will need to happen. And it could be a weekly schedule, or it could be a 2-week schedule. We'll try to create, and this is where I think, you know, many academics would say, or teachers would say, if things become, you know, asynchronous, how do students have structure, and how do we give them guidance? I think you can give them guidance in an asynchronous design by clever use of deadlines, and by spreading out, you know, timed interactive activities like a timed quiz, or a timed online game, or a timed live chat, something like that, across different periods. But be careful to not over-structure it, to not put something on every single day, because then you would swamp students. So 2 or 3 days a week where you have these activities, and then you can, you know, stretch it out. So I'm giving you these things, or sharing these things, and I'm going to stop sharing now, not to say that this is the way you should do it, you know, that this is the one thing that would suit everybody. But just to say that there are ways to start thinking about this, and there are structures that work, which you can leverage and you can bring into your classroom, into your teaching. And I'm going to stop now.
Okay, thank you, Logan. So I think I'm going to begin with the first question. So we're talking about asynchronous communications, and so my first question is, how can we create a sense of community, or how do we best engage students? Let's talk about asynchronous communication first. You know, how do we engage them when we're not interacting at the same time in the same place? Does anyone want to answer that question?
I think some of the points that Logan made about, you know, being able to use Canvas as a tool is invaluable. You know, quite often when you're live in a lesson and you're talking, you might miss bits, or the direction of a class takes a move. You know, it changes direction ever so slightly. Because the topic that I'm teaching is all about engagement. So you're going to follow what's naturally engaging for the students, but you might miss some really pivotal points. And to be able to post things up on Canvas ahead of the lesson, as well as after the lesson, is a great tool to allow the students to revisit, so to speak, everything that's been going on in the lesson and everything we've been talking about. It also gives the students a chance to learn going into the lesson. So they go into the lesson with some prior knowledge to then engage and talk about and create this kind of forum. In one of my classes, one of the solutions that I found was simply, the classes were very small because I would only use the Zoom classes for the theory element, just to talk about what we're going to be doing this week. And I would simply run through a little bit of theory, and then I would set a task. And that would pretty much be the end of the Zoom lesson. That I would then allow the students to go away and do the task. And then we would reconvene either later that day or perhaps a couple of days after that to evaluate what it was that the students did. So this kind of naturally turned into a forum, because the introduction to every new class was, okay, what have you been up to since the last class? Each talk about what you've been doing, talk about the problems that you've come across, talk about the successes that you've had, and we'll run through everyone in the class. And this kind of created a dialogue between the students and helped them all kind of have this shared learning experience about. It also helped their presentation skills and the way that they conduct themselves online. But it really got the class to talk individually first, because at this point we weren't in a classroom. The class hadn't even met at this point, because we had people from other courses taking it as an elective. So not everyone were actually Scenic Art major students. So the class hadn't even met at this point, but they could still talk about individual experiences online. And I think that worked really well, you know, as well as posting up videos, demonstrations, and the like on Canvas. So I think this kind of learning within your own time is invaluable. And another method of this is actually recording the Zoom chats, posting them later on Canvas. Gives people time to reconsider everything that was talked about in what could be a very short time. You know, when you're put on the spot and you're asked a question, you don't often come up with the perfect answer. You know, it's very difficult to come up with the perfect answer all of the time, but you might think about something post that answer that is beneficial, and to be able to then put that on Canvas, or, you know, in a video or anything else is really important. And as I said, allowing the students to have that time to learn within their own time, within their own structure was massive. And one of the tasks that we have for all of our courses is having to write a journal. So a lesson journal, what you learned in a lesson, and to be able to kind of revisit the lesson through a recording, or for me to be able to post something up and go, this is something that you should think about as well, or maybe visit this YouTube video and have a look at this. They're great tools, and they're not something that I initially thought I would be using a lot of. You know, I haven't got any formal training in the subject that I'm teaching. I did a fine art degree. I did a painting degree. So to now teach scenic art, everything I learned by watching people more senior to me and assisting them. So that would be the most natural way to teach it. But obviously, with circumstances as they are, we can't really do that. So to find all of these new tools, and I do feel like I'm finding new tools constantly that can aid the practical teaching within the classroom. And this asynchronous method is one of those, you know, and being able to post beforehand and afterwards and create discussions amongst the students.
Yeah, Brian, I think it's really interesting because especially because you mentioned that you're a sort of a new teacher, so you don't have kind of, you know, the background of experience, you know, like the theater or like the university classroom where, you know, when you want to transform, when you want to create interaction in a space that is, you know, that have fixed seating is a lot harder than, you know, when you approach it and then you can just think about how to use different tools and do things differently. And Stella, I think you would like to speak on this question as well.
Yeah, I want to add on to Brian, you know, because I teach dance, so I just want to share my experience, how I'm going to deal with it to build up a sense of community, you know, under this time, because everyone is working at home, you know, feeling like really alienated. So I think like at the end of the lessons of the class, I think first, what I said, we modify the content, not just like only dealing with movement or technique. I think it's important to share, just like what Brian said, you know, to build up the sense of togetherness. So at the end of the class, I build in like the discussion, a very short discussion to share, you know, what they reflect on the class. I think in this way, it really helps. And also other times, before the class, I said that the students are less alert. And like what Logan said, you know, how to get the student to take ownership. So I asked one of the students to take the warm-up class. So today is like Louise, the other day is Brian, the next day is Logan, you know. So they have a sense of like ownership, you know, of that class to start with. I think it worked for me, you know, so I think maybe people can try this. And the third thing I think is big use of the technology, you know, with this asynchronous, you know, learning. I think the breakout rooms, sometimes you divided them in groups, you know, so encourage that they have the discussion, you know, and walk out some movements together. I think it helps. And the last thing is, I think at this stage, I think to engage students in a sort of like a digital projects is important. You know, for example, like the School of Dance, we work with the CCDC to work a very small section of a Hellenized Weather Spring. I think this kind of like a digital project at this time, it really pull, you know, the students together and also the staff member too. Thank you.
If I can add something quite quickly, I think it's a very important question about how to create community, and I think it's important to rethink the notion of community, right? And I think what Stella was just saying about ownership and giving students some role to play in that is really powerful, and helping the students, inviting the students to define what an online learning community is for them and what a community could be. You know, it's not people who share an hour in a class together once a week, like that's not the community. But when we are moving very quickly from this face-to-face to online, that's what we're trying to recreate. And if you think about a connection, like I have a really deep connection with a book that I'm reading of someone I've never really met before, and yet that can really inspire me and be something that's fixed in my head, right? But I have to be in the frame of mind to engage that content. You know, so you can I think as online teachers, what we have to do is help our students get into that frame of mind to engage that content, and invite them to shape that with us, right? And what we're doing is to create that community, and it involves, you know, stepping outside of our comfort zones and trying to rethink it. But you know, if you take the big picture, so many people connect with people in ways which they never thought they would on the internet, right? And that was one of the great blessings of the internet, which is now kind of deviates into the world of trolls. Just stay off social media. Everything else is wonderful. And I think students are the same way. You know, they and I think Stella was saying this earlier, that they are in a sense of this deep isolation, and they want to come back to campus, and they want to come back to learning, because I think they miss community. They miss being with other people in the classroom or sharing space, right? So, but they can get that more authentic community online, perhaps, right? A student who never said anything, who sat at the back of the class, who didn't really put their hands up, might be the first one to put their virtual hands up on Zoom, right? Because it's a lower barrier to expressing yourself now in this kind of digital environment. So there are opportunities as well.
Brilliant. I'm really glad we've talked a lot about community and learning communities, because I think that's really key, particularly in this context. I want to pick up on two questions that kind of share the same theme, which have come through the chat. So thank you everyone who's been posting questions. They're brilliant. Edlin's asking about, thank you for sharings. I'm curious about each of your priorities when it comes to thinking about making teaching accessible, and what are your biggest concerns? And then Ruth's asked, we found that students find the modules difficult to navigate as they're very text heavy. This impacts discoverability and engagement with content. So I think both of these questions are about accessibility and about how we manage the content so that different students can access that. I wonder if anybody has any views on that, perhaps particularly thinking about what are the things that we can do as teachers to make our resources and that learning as accessible as it can be to as many different students as possible. Yeah, Stella. Sorry, Stella, you might need to unmute your microphone.
Hear me well? All right, okay. I think first of all, I think yes, I think that there's so many things that we need to teach to accomplish because of the assessment, because we need to, you know, at the end of the course, you know, a certain period of time, we need to see whether the student learn or not. So how are we going to make full advantage of this online? We call it like restrictions, you know, and make it an advantage, you know, accessible to students. So for example, I just want to give example, like in my repertory class, we need to do a group work, not solo, not one by one. So we have to, for example, like we have to lift the arm together in one particular musical count, you know, things like that. So it's very challenging for students. So in this kind of like context, I think we need to like refocus. And also I think the teachers and also the students, we need to have a different kind of like a mindset, you know, to retrain them, you know, and also focusing not only like the technical skill, but I think maybe upper body, the coordination, I think it will help. And also to make full use of where their available resource at home, because like in one repertory, in one creative work, we need to find a props to use at home. So other than, you know, standardize a particular prop, we can creatively ask the student to find something that is relevant, you know, that can be created to, you know, in that kind of courses. So I think they will get same result. You know, they will also, you know, having the kinesthetic experience, as well as, you know, learning like how to be together, you know, like in this virtual space. And maybe Brian or Logan can add on to this.
Yeah, I could add on. One of the advantages I found actually was almost the opposite to what Stella was talking about there about working as a team. One of the things that I find that if I set a task and it's an open task, the different interpretations that people have because they're working remotely, to then all bring that together and talk about that creates this kind of forum, this kind of community. And the ownership that Stella was talking about earlier on, each takes ownership then over the work that they've created. And I found it's different from a classroom, because in the classroom, there's an immediate discussion as to how you would approach a task. And you would probably find that a lot of the the class will do the same thing. Whereas if you're separated by distance, you're not in the same location, the interpretations could be many, which is fascinating, and it's a starting point for discussion. So I think this is kind of more relating back to the earlier question about how you create this community, really. So I'm just going to leave it there. There are other questions on the chat that I was having a look at as well. And there was one there about how you would deal with discomfort and resistance. One of the things that I found really difficult about the first lesson was being able to read the audience. You're in a classroom, you're sitting around the table, you can see instantly whether someone understands what you're talking about or not. This isn't the same online. So one of the first things that I did, I've got the luxury of having small classes as well. So I guess it wouldn't apply to everyone. But one of the first things that I made, I suggested that students do, was to make sure that they turned on their camera. Firstly, this means that they're all engaged in the lesson. I remember the first lesson, the one girl was still in her pajamas and kind of on the bed, but then in the second lesson, because she knew she was going to be on camera, was, you know, awake and ready for the lesson. So I think kind of this helps to create that community as well, and for them to see each other and talk to each other, you know, is really interesting. Also, the issue that was brought up earlier on about people being afraid to stick their hands up, having this text chat on the side is great, because you can say, look, if you don't want to put your hands up or you're not comfortable speaking, write your question down. I won't even say who's mentioned the question. I will just answer it. If there's anything that you don't understand, you can ask it, and you haven't got to be afraid of other people in the class judging you for not understanding or anything like that, because I realize it can be intimidating to put your hand up and say, I don't understand what you're talking about. It's a very difficult thing to do, but if you put it in the chat, then, you know, I can explain it in a different way. And I think this is one thing that's great, you know, and this is something that you already have with things like Canvas and through the journals and the note-taking, that you can already engage in whether someone understands or not. But this is just another way of being able to do that. And I think being able to see people is still massively important. You don't necessarily have to be around the table. It can be via Zoom, as we're doing now, but to be able to see facial expressions and to be able to really view each other as well, you know, each of the classmates can see the other classmates. So it creates some sort of environment of community, even though we're not in the same location.
So Logan, I'd like to possibly bring some of these ideas together that Brian was talking about. So obviously we have the initial question around accessibility, possibly around texts, but then also around understanding and discovering, actually, are students registering and understanding the content, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, so the accessibility question is interesting. I think in an online environment, because there's just more pathways to discovering content, often when we are designing it, we have a narrative or a structure in mind, but that's not explicit. You know, so if the student doesn't follow that structure, because you don't have to read a book from page 1 to page 100, you can jump through different pages. And that's the beauty actually of being able to read a book, because I'm not constrained, right? When I get a book, it doesn't say page 10 is locked until you finish page 9. I can jump to the ending and jump backwards. And that's me taking ownership over my journey. But if that pathway isn't super clear, and if I jump all around it, I can end up feeling very confused, or that I've not really traveled anywhere. So I think when we're creating content in an online space, we need to be a little bit more explicit about the pathway, still give students freedom, or have this in-between phase, you know, so you can explore content in the modules, but you can't do the assessment or the quiz until you've done this bit, right? So that we can structure their learning a little bit and make sure that they are not taking on too much or going into a space where they get too confused, so they know, all right, it seems like it's an achievable, measurable piece. So the bit that Ruth was talking about, Canvas offers you a lot of flexibility to present the content in the way you want to, but maybe not so much flexibility that you can completely reorganize or re-visualize how you want that content to be presented. And that is a limitation or a huge constraint. But I like to say creativity loves constraints, which is just an excuse maybe. But you'll need to find different ways to present that content or to guide, rather than thinking about it as presenting content, think about it as different ways to guide the student through the learning journey, right? So leveraging calendars perhaps, so putting different tasks in the calendar, breaking up the task into different assessments that are then structured into modules, using a syllabus page to have as their home from where they start, and then find the other things in the site, and then inviting students to give you feedback and keep reshaping that content, right? The point that Brian made about the Zoom cameras, I think is an interesting one, because he only also put that onto the chat, and that's something I kind of go back and forth on, to be honest. Like, I think it's as a presenter when I'm speaking and I can't see who I'm speaking to, I find that very unnerving. Back when I was like making videos and had to talk into a little camera, I guess you kind of overcome that. But when you're trying to teach, you're trying to see the people that you are teaching, right? And as a teacher, that's where, as a good teacher, you're trying to speak to somebody and be in that moment. And then it's really difficult to do that when you can't see the student. But as a student, or as someone who's been on the other end of many kind of, watching webinars or Zoom meetings and hours at the end, it's exhausting having to kind of have my camera on all the time. And then you can see whatever's happening in my house and be into my life. And, maybe I'm not ready for that. Like, if I am, and if I can bring my life into my classroom and share it with all my friends, I think that's a real deep sense of connection. But if I feel like I have to be someone else when I turn on the camera, then I'm going to be disengaged, right? So I think especially in this time when the students are going through lots of things in their own life and may not be in the best learning environment, be a little bit kinder on them and on yourself, right? And find a different way to kind of work around that. I know people who have a friend join their lectures so that they can speak to their friends, because they know their friends are going to turn their camera on and look at them, which is a old public speaking trick of having people in the audience who you like and and who will give you confidence. And then eventually you can, in smaller groups, the student will build on their confidence to have their cameras turned on, or they can turn on their cameras and show you something else, right? Which is another kind of trick another friend shared with me, that just to see whether they're engaged or to have a moment of sharing, they turn on the camera and show them their view, or they show them something they're reading, or show them something they're eating, so that the other people in the class feel like they get a short window into your life, but I can control that window. And having a little sense of control is powerful. It's empowering. It gives me a hook into my community and some ownership over what's happening now.
Yeah, Logan, I very much agree with you. What you say about giving, it's about having the technology is not about giving, having more control on your students, but actually giving them more control. Like Stella, you mentioned, giving students the choice. I kind of want to stay on this question of accessibility a little longer, because right now we have many kind of different tools, different ways of presenting information. So do you have some examples in terms of how, being able to present things online and offline, how it can actually meet the needs for, students with special educational needs, or perhaps in Hong Kong, a very specific setting, we have students with different language needs, and also maybe like kind of like a taboo is that, we don't want to talk about mental health issues, but, but actually, there are recent studies that showing actually a lot of Hong Kong adults are, suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic distress disorder, because of, the social unrest, and also compounded by, the pandemic that happened recently. So do you have any suggestions or specific examples on how, these kind of technology can help students with those needs?
Yeah, I think something that was mentioned earlier on about students being able to tackle the content at their leisure and in their own time is great for overcoming some of these issues. You have to be aware, I have to be aware that my students are learning in a second language, and each of them would have a different understanding or might take longer. I have a student within one of my classes that has learning difficulties, and she's found it massively beneficial to be able to rewatch recordings of the theory, or being able to watch pre-recorded content that I can put on videos. Again, this is back to whether the students have understood some of the content, and then if you feel that maybe some of the content was missed, you can then, in your own time. I've done recordings simply on Zoom where it's just me in my room with the camera talking about the subject again, and I can repost that, and it can really help in terms of rewiring, I guess, learning it again. The same content again and again in different modes is really good. I think it's important, just touching on what Logan said about not just dumping any old content on there, because that just becomes confusing. You don't want a case where you've got your course and then you've got all of this other information on the side. It needs to be directed. It needs to be information that's relevant. Of course, you can add, I found myself sharing things with students specifically because they have a certain interest in something that's slightly off topic. And I can still do that, but you're not going to share it with the entire group because it might confuse the issue. So you do want to just kind of focus the content that you've got on, but the ability to offer it in lots of different ways, an article, an extract from a book, a video, a soundbite, lots of these different methods. If you're having the same content delivered in different ways, then I think that's massively beneficial. But it does need to be focused. You don't want to just bombard the student with information.
Hi, thank you. I just want to add on, this issue of wellness. We have been, I think all of us, under the stress level is really high, especially in our first part of the last semester, because of the pandemic. We just have to switch everything online in a very short time. So I think there's a lot of we need to, as teachers, we need to respond to things with immediacy, straight away. We can't wait for tomorrow, And also, I think Canvas is a very good platform, for me to. I don't want to use the word check, but I just want to see how my students engage, on that kind of in this learning platform, whether the access time, when there will be alert. If you see those students haven't been, using the course, materials or certain time, then I reach out, to the student, ask them, is there anything I can help, So I think with that, we build up a kind of a communication, a kind of a support, with each other, So that, and also, that's, I want to give you an example how we deal with some anxiety issues, also the intensified relationship, at home, and everybody's when working home in March that time. So I received some feedback from my students that certain time of the day is not appropriate, to do online class. For example, 5 to 7 o'clock, while everyone is, mom's doing cooking, maybe siblings, preparation for the DSA exam, that time. So we just in 2 days, we switch trying to shift the timetable to certain time, so that I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to alleviate, the stress level, of our students. So whatever, we can do, so I think this is a good way to make sure, to deal with the stress issue. And also, I just want to emphasize the importance of having your classes videoed. And also, that's what enable the students who having Wi-Fi problems on certain day, then they still be access, to the class material, and they won't lose out. And also, to achieve, their learning goals. So I think these are important support.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there. Just seconding what Brian was saying about having content in different modes or means. I think that lets students choose what they want to learn, how they learn, and giving them the flexibility that helps students who have learning differences, who may feel challenged by the content, who may be stressing out. And what Stella was saying about wellness, I think a lot of students and a lot of teachers are not really sure about what they're going through and don't have the words to express it. So maybe helping our students and giving them the words to express it and opportunities to talk about it is useful. I think with the biggest thing, with online learning and accessibility is having too much content, too many things, and overwhelming students who don't deal well with over information. And if the content is developed in a way that is not accessible, like it doesn't work with screen readers, or there isn't subtext or tiles, but those are things which you can, you have a checklist and you make sure that the subtitles to content and the screen reader works with it. And in some way, that's the easier thing. It's very tedious and you're very careful about doing it. And that's the easier thing. The harder thing is to ensure that you're portraying content in different ways, but at the same time, not overwhelming students with lots of different things. And there isn't really, I think, a simple way to know when you've hit that right balance. You just have to kind of go through it like a student. And, as both Stella and Brian were saying, you have to listen to your students. You have to watch how they're going. And if they're not engaging, maybe it's because of how the content is structured, and ask them, talk to them, and co-design it. I think one of the wonderful opportunities from this huge pivot is we all know we're doing something new very quickly, right? And I think it gives you a lot of permission to do things you may not have been able to do before, like redesign content on the fly, bring students into your design, be open about the challenges that we are all facing. And I think that will give students a bit more confidence also. And sharing that you're not prepared, but you're working really hard isn't something I think that students will feel dissatisfied with. Like I think they'll all know that it's just reality. The unreal thing is saying I'm completely 100% ready and this curriculum is set in stone, right? Like that's not realistic. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I wanted to touch on that exact issue. I think honesty is massively important when we're talking about wellness, and being able to kind of talk to the class and say, this is a new experience for me as well. This is the first time I'm on this journey. We're on this journey together. So it is an amazing, there's an amazing possibility there to co-collaborate with the way that the course goes, as Logan was saying. I just wanted to make that point. Sorry for interrupting, by the way, Logan.
Okay, I think we're coming to the last sort of 4 or 5 minutes. So I have a kind of a final question, which we're tending to ask in these webinars, which is, if there was one thing, one takeaway that you would have that you might suggest to either teachers or students that would improve their teaching or learning and would help them overcome these barriers we've been talking about, what might that be? What would be the one thing that you would suggest?
I've probably talked about it already. but recording. So I've already felt that in future, when things do return to the structure, as it were, that we had before, then I would still use this tool of particularly the theory elements of recording these theory elements to share on Canvas and to share so that they can be revisited. Because if something's said in a classroom, it's often said once and it's gone. It's a fleeting moment. So to have a recorded copy of that information, whether that's posted pre or post the lesson, is entirely up to the content and how you want to engage people. But I think use of recordings to then convey that that theory element, particularly in my subject, I think is something that I will continue to use, regardless of whether we have to conduct online lessons or not.
Great. So recordings and making those accessible so people can return to those. Stella?
I just thought, yes, the technology helped a lot, but it cannot take away the human interaction, the feeling of like the empathy, resilience of this time. So I think this is very important when we go online. I think this kind of quality, that I need to remember as a dance educator, that we need to really understand what people are going through. So constantly, I mentioned the cycle, the designing, planning, reflecting, and then redesigning, So I think that cycle is very important, going through so that we can shift from one period to the other. And then we will improve, over a period of time and finding a better way.
Great. So thinking about our students and responding to them and their needs, I think that's a great point as well. Logan?
Yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, it's difficult to think about one, Robert, but I'm going to cheat and emphasize Stella's point and then give you another one. And it was also what Brian was saying, which is partnership. Think of your students as partners in their learning journey, but also your learning journey, right? Because we're all learning how to do this. So bring them on board as partners. And I think that will give you a bit more freedom to reinvent how you are teaching and how they are learning, and give them more ownership. And you can be explicit about this to tell them that they are partners in this learning journey. If you're thinking about a tool or an approach, I'd say try to use your calendar more, scheduling things in the calendar, in the Canvas calendar or your teaching calendar, not over scheduling it, but putting little items and when you think a student should be doing this or when they should be doing this by, rather than when they should exactly be doing this. So if a student is losing the structure of day-to-day classes or just lots of synchronous activity, they can still look at their calendar and say, so these are all the things that I have been encouraged to do, or blocks of time. And I think that gives you a sense of whether you are giving them too many things to do, or not enough things to do, because we can also overwhelm students in this period by just kind of throwing lots of content at them. And also gives you a sense of how much you need to be doing by looking at that calendar.
So structuring that asynchronous space through the use of calendar, I think that's a great idea as well. So
that was good.
Brilliant. So that kind of concludes this webinar. We hope there have been lots of practical things that you're actually going to be able to take away from the session, which you can use to improve teaching and learning. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our three speakers, to Brian, to Stella and to Logan, and also to the wider EduIt team who helped put this together both technically and administratively. Whilst it concludes the live stream, we're going to try something, we're going to pilot something with this webinar, which is that whilst we'll turn off our cameras, we're going to keep the chat and the question and answer live, and I think our speakers are going to join us online. So if you'd like to continue posting questions, feel free to do so, and we can have a chat in the chat room.
And if you would like to rewatch the webinar or share it with your colleagues who are not here with us today, you can, we'll be posting the recording of this and as well as the last webinar on our website, and we'll be emailing you for further details. And to conclude today's webinar, the next webinar is going to be on Tuesday, 29th of September. It's going to be at 9:30 a.m. Hong Kong time, so it's the same time. And then we'll be discussing how we can make online teaching and learning more engaging. We'll have speakers from the Academy's Practice and Research Department and also the School of Chinese Opera. And joining them will be an internationally renowned writer and academic, Curtis Bunk.